Book Worms Horror Podcast is sponsored by Creepy Crate. Creepy Crate is a horror and true crime subscription box filled with spooky collectibles, macabre accessories, and terrifying goodies. Each bi-monthly box is filled with over $85 of terror and includes at least one horror or true crime book. This box delivers dread to your doorstep for just $39.99 with free shipping. Go to creepycrate.store to subscribe. Use the code BOOKWORM5 at checkout to get $5 off your subscription. That's BOOKWORM5 for $5 off your subscription. And now to the show. Welcome to Book Worms Horror, the podcast that offers you tips on writing, especially in the horror genre. My name is James Ippoliti, and I host another uplifting daily podcast called Turn Off, Tune Out, and Drop In. If you need a daily pick-me-up to get you creating, check it out. Issue 2 of Book Worms Horror, the zine is out. It's on the Etsy link. Go check it out. It's in the show notes. Today on the podcast, I talked to Regina about creating characters. Regina is a Waddy Award winner for Best Horror Novel, as well as multiple screenwriting awards, including a Webby honoree. Regina is also the contributing editor of the best-selling Local Haunts, a horror tube anthology. Find Regina and her alter ego, Batilda, at her booktube channel, Regina's Haunted Library, and on her blog, rstclaire.com. Regina and myself are the editors of the Book Worms Horror Zine, and since we're seeking great horror fiction for bookworms, we created this weekly podcast to offer writers quick tips on writing for the genre. Find all our links in the show notes. Now let's jump into my conversation with Regina as she speaks with me from her haunted library. All right, so this week we're going to talk about characters, creating characters. Actually, I got a quote here from Hemingway. When writing a novel, a writer should create living people, not characters. Character is a caricature. How do you feel about that?
I totally agree.
Yeah, I think that's... How does a person create a well-rounded person in their story? What do you think the answer is for that?
Well, I have to say, as someone who's read a lot of fiction and short story submissions and indie fiction, my overall complaint is a lack of character development. It actually boggles my mind that people don't bother, and I'm going to sound a little critical here, but that people don't bother to really flesh out a character at all. And I think maybe because sometimes I read a lot of genre fiction, like horror. Let's say you're writing a slasher, that it's easy to be like, well, she's just a girl at the camp. Like and sometimes they don't even give the character a name. They don't give the character any kind of physical description. I think that's a huge mistake, and I wish people would stop doing it. I don't understand it. It doesn't take... And it's not like you have to put all the physical descriptions in like the first, the first sentence when you describe the character. It's like when you're writing a screenplay, enter the policeman, and then you have like a quick descriptor. Is he old? Is he young? Is he fat? Is he thin? Blah, blah, blah. Something about him that you'll remember what that character looks like or his behavior. And you can get very creative about that kind of description, but I see a lack of that. And I'm not sure why, but I would encourage writers to think about that a little more. And actually, if you can draw, even if you do a rough drawing, sketch them out. Like, know what they look like, know all the specific things about them, because that will help make them come alive, and give them flaws, give them rough edges, because that's who we are as people. We have flaws and rough edges, I don't see enough of that when I read fiction. I see a lot of, and even like professionally produced stuff, I see a lot of kind of bland characters.
If you can't draw, you can also like go to Pinterest or just Google images to search for people.
Yep.
And I would even say if you like AI, there's OpenAI art, which you can just like describe your character and the AI will actually create that character and you can take that picture and post it on your computer so you can have a picture of them.
Absolutely. I didn't know that. But yes, like a paste board or whatever of your character, have it really clear in your head. And I love writing, like all of my protagonists are always flawed, especially in horror. Very flawed people. And they're not necessarily likable people, but we're all flawed. So, when you're reading, you're reading alone, and you can get insight into these characters and their dark sides, and they should have good sides too. You want to balance it out. But I see a lot of generic characters, and I think that's what bores me and makes me lose interest in a book or a story more than anything. Is a generic character.
How important do you think it is to write a biography for your character?
I remember when I was in theater school, and it was pretty dreadful to have to do this. We would have to write these lengthy biographies of our character that we were playing in like a scene or something. And so that was part of my training. I don't write lengthy biographies for any of my characters like that. I'll take notes, but they're more like mental notes. Like I see them. I have a strong visual sense of who my characters are, what they look like, what they're doing in the space.
How far back go in their history before the book starts? Talk about like in your head. A lot of people say that the biographies they write don't ever end up in the book. But do you know their childhood? Or do you avoid things that you don't think would matter?
I think in most of my protagonists, I do, because it comes out in the story usually. There's either some kind of flashback or the character flaw is related to something in their childhood. Like in my current book, Carney, I'm living with my character. His name's Dag Alton, and he's an asshole. And he's a sexist and he's spoiled rotten, but you kind of like are with him in this. I mean, hopefully I'm with him in the story. And the story begins with him getting Me Too'd by an ex-girlfriend. And he has a complete meltdown, and he's recorded. Someone's recording him with her phone, and it goes viral, and he loses everything. And at 40, he's got to move back in with his parents. And then you see his flaws, but then he's a journalist, and he gets on to this new story. And I'm hoping that he's trying to redeem himself. And I'm hoping that the character is flawed, but has enough of a spirit that you want him to succeed, or at least you're with him.
Yeah, that's my question. How do you create a very flawed character like that, but have the audience still want to root for him?
I think you have to give him or her something that they're really passionate about that we can relate to. Like when I wrote my book, Fashion Victims, which very few people read, I actually think it's one of my better stories, but that's just me. My main character was a fashion designer, but he was a mess. He was a mess in his personal life. He was doing drugs. He was unhealthy in every way. He's desperate, but because he's desperate to create, he's got this one fashion collection to prove himself, or else he's out of the business and he's broke. So the stakes were really high that he was a success. So when I was writing it, even though I knew that he was a mess, and then I flashed back to why, his childhood abuse, his issue with his father, he had this horrible secret that he kept hidden. And it wasn't that his father abused him. It was something that he did that he couldn't live with. And that's why he was self-destructive. But he cared so much about his work. And I've met people like that, they're so driven. He cared so much about his work that I felt with that character. Now, some of the reviews found his character to be too despicable to to root for, but I don't know. I guess that's the chance I'm willing to take because I have to love my character.
Mm-hmm.
Remember?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
You're writing a book takes a very long time.
Yeah.
You got to live with that character for that much time.
Or remember in that great movie, the Hitchcock film Suspicion, with Cary Grant and Lynn Fontaine, when she's talking to the woman who's the mystery writer, and she's like, "Oh, what about Joan Fontaine?" That's it, not Lynn. Joan Fontaine says, "Oh, I was so fascinated by your villain," and she's like, "My villain?" The writer's like, "They're my heroes. I'm in love with my heroes." And I thought, yes, you have to. Of course, also in horror, there could be a fine line between hero and villain.
Yeah.
And you can write a book from a villain's point of view. I've seen that, and that's tricky. But
how important do you think the name of your character is? Now, you just mentioned the name of your Carney character named Dag.
Right. Daggert Alton.
And I love this little tidbit of trivia that Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind was originally written as Pansy O'Hara.
That's true, yes.
And because the editor was like, look, change the name and we'll publish it.
Can you imagine Pansy? It just doesn't have the same.
No, Rat and Pansy. No. Yeah. So how important do you think that is?
I think names are great, and I always enjoy coming up with good ones, I hope.
How do you come up with names? Do you use a book or do you search online?
Mm-hmm. Well, in Carney, I just changed like a major character's name because I realized I had another major character's name started with a C and had like ended with the same kind of syllable. So I was like the vowel. So I was like, I better change that, and so I did that. But I don't know, it just kind of comes to me. I don't really have a formula for that. Sometimes I name my characters after people I know, but not hopefully in a real obvious way. But I also do picture people I know as my characters sometimes. It's probably more times than I'll really admit. But
well, I've heard a lot of authors, what they'll do is they picture somebody in their life, but by the time they're finished with it, it's not even resembling them anymore. But it's kind of like a jumping point.
Absolutely. I mean, when I did my fashion victims, I had worked in the fashion industry for a very brief amount of time, and I used a lot of that experience and people I met in that world in that book.
Now, there's the term action is character. What does that mean to you?
Oh, action is character. I don't know. I've never heard that.
No?
No.
F. Scott Fitzgerald once
wow.
said that.
Sorry, I love his writing. Action is character. I guess it means that the character is revealed through the action rather than like a description.
Exactly, yeah. And especially, how you've been describing your characters, right? If you just write, he was a bad man.
Oh, right, yeah.
I think we learn about not your personal, but we learn about characters through their actions.
Oh, here's a great example of that.
Yeah.
A wonderful film, Paper Moon, by Peter Bogdanovich with Ryan O'Neal.
And the girl.
Tatum O'Neal, right. It's a
O'Neal,
great movie. That movie and Last Picture Show are masterpieces. But there's an incredible scene, and I think it's the first scene in the movie, when there's no dialogue. You just see Ryan O'Neal's character walking through a cemetery, and it's all black and white. It looks like it's in Nebraska or someplace. And he leans over, he passes a grave that has flowers on it. He leans over and takes the flowers off the grave, kind of spruces them up a little bit, and then goes to another grave, which is his former girlfriend, I think, or lover, and puts the flowers on her grave. And that's where, and then Tatum O'Neal's the daughter of this woman. And there's an idea that he had some kind of relationship with her. Is he the girl's father? That's sort of the question throughout the film. But as I watch that, I'm like, this tells me everything I need to know about that character. He's willing to steal someone else's flowers, which most people wouldn't do that. I mean, I wouldn't do that, steal flowers off a grave. It's a really shady move, but it also, so it shows that he's shady, and he's a hustler, but it also shows that he's sentimental enough to care to bring flowers to this funeral.
I think that would be, for our listeners, an excellent project or challenge to just write like a paragraph or a couple paragraphs about a character without doing anything but describing them through action.
Yes.
And that would really be a good challenge, because a lot of people are like, the police officer came in. Well, how can we do that through action, and at the end maybe be like, oh yeah, he's a cop, like
right. That's really great. And or if you have a mirror, do you stop and preen like I always do?
Yeah, right.
Or do you walk right by? That tells you a lot about, you could either be someone who is like, scrutinizing your appearance in the mirror. You could be admiring your appearance in the mirror. You could be like, I don't care what I look like. Or you could be like, I feel like I look so awful, I'm going to pretend this mirror is not here. Those are three different approaches to a mirror that can tell you something about a character.
Exactly. All right. Well, that is character. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about what they say, because next week's all about dialogue. Thank you for tuning in to the Book Worms Horror Podcast. All our links are in the show notes. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Bookworms is a Guerrilladelphia production.